Imani stood 32 floors above Seattle, the afternoon light glinting off the steel and glass of her city. The nameplate on her door, the one visible through the flawless pane of her office, read, Imani Chief Executive Officer, Nexus Path. From this height, the world looked orderly, predictable. A complex system she understood, a machine she had built and now commanded. Her external life was a fortress of success metrics and quarterly goals. People respected her here. Her voice moved markets. Her decisions employed hundreds. But inside, a familiar cold dread was coiling in her stomach. It was the same corrosive feeling she got every spring, a bitter counterpoint to the blooming cherry blossoms. Easter was 3 days away, and Easter meant dinner at Nana Ilara's. It meant driving back into the suffocating cloud of her past, where she was not the CEO. She was just Imani, the other one, the creative one. She closed her eyes, and the view of the Puget Sound was instantly replaced by the memory of last year's dinner. The cloying scent of honey-baked ham and her mother's sweet potato pie. Malik, her older brother, was holding court at the table. His voice was loud, booming, with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never been second. He was boasting about a new efficiency algorithm at Apex.io, using terms designed to fly over the heads of half the table, while simultaneously impressing the only two people who mattered. Her parents, both brilliant computer scientists, hung on his every word. Their pride was a tangible thing, a warm, focused light shining only on him, the prodigy. Then the inevitable turn. The spotlight always eventually swung to her, but it was never bright. It was dim, obligatory. Her mother's gaze shifted, the warmth dimming to a polite, strained curiosity. "And how is your little company doing, sweetie little?" The word was a perfectly polished stone, smooth and small and designed to be thrown. It was a verbal pat on the head. "It's fine, Mom. We're growing." Her father had nodded, that same absent, vaguely pained look on his face. "That's good, Kung." As if she had just told him she'd won a ribbon at the local bake sale. Under the table, her fiancé Jordan had squeezed her hand. It was meant to be supportive, a gesture of solidarity. "Just ignore him," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. But when she looked at him, his eyes held no comfort. They held a familiar, weary impatience. It was the same look he gave her when she canceled their dinner reservations to handle a server crisis. It was the look of a man who did not understand why she bothered clinging to this draining hobby when she could just be his wife managing his social calendar. The squeeze on her hand suddenly felt less like support and more like a cage. She had pulled her hand away, smiling weakly at her mother, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Yes, just fine." That little company was a rebellion, a quiet, decades-long insurrection against the family she was born into. Her childhood home was not a home in the traditional sense. It was alive, an incubator, a testament to the singular vision of her parents. They were both computer scientists, veterans of the dot-com boom, who had met at some legendary Seattle startup in the 1990s. Their love story was probably written in C++. In their house, technology was not a tool. It was a religion. They spoke in a language of optimization, of logical processors, of scalable architecture. Dinner conversations were not about feelings or school plays. They were about Moore's Law, the inefficiency of the local power grid, or the flaws in a new operating system. Emotions were messy, illogical variables that disrupted clean code. And in this Silicon sanctuary, Malik was the anointed one. He was the prophet, and Imani was the quiet, disappointing apostate. She could pinpoint the exact moment his divinity was confirmed. It was a rainy Tuesday. Malik was 10 years old. Imani at 7 was on the living room floor, with crayons meticulously drawing a house with a disproportionately large garden. Malik was hunched over the family's bulky desktop computer, the beige tower humming loudly. Her father walked into the room, coffee mug in hand, and stopped. He stared at the monitor over Malik's shoulder. His mug clattered as he set it down. "Look at this." He breathed, his voice tight with a reverence Imani had never heard before. He called her mother from the kitchen. He figured out how to write a simple program. On the screen, colorful, blocky geometric patterns swirled in a hypnotic repeating loop. It was rudimentary, it was simple, but to her parents, it was a sign from the digital heavens. They stood behind Malik's chair, two devotees witnessing a miracle. Her father's hand, which so rarely initiated contact, landed on Malik's head and ruffled his hair. "He's going to be the next Bill Gates," her father declared. It was not a hope. It was a statement of fact, a prophecy delivered. From that day, the dynamic of the house shifted irrevocably. The spare bedroom, a pleasant carpeted room with floral wallpaper that Imani had liked, was gutted. It was repainted, a sterile, institutional white. Her father moved in a long workbench, a second monitor, and towering shelves that he quickly filled with thick, intimidating manuals on programming languages Imani could not even pronounce. The room was christened the lab. It became Malik's sacred space. He would disappear inside for hours, the door firmly closed. The only sound from within was the rapid, furious tapping of the keyboard, a sound that became the heartbeat of their home. Imani was explicitly forbidden from entering. "You'll disturb his workflow," her father would say, not unkindly but with absolute finality. "Malik is doing important work." Imani would walk past that closed door, smelling the faint, sharp odor of hot plastic and ozone. She would press her ear against the wood, listening to the furious clicking, and feel a profound hollowing invisibility. It was not just a room, it was a shrine to her brother's potential, and she was just an audience member in her own home, a ghost haunting the hallways, watching her brother's grand ascension from the cheap seats. She was the one who drew houses with gardens. She was the one who did not and could not understand the important work. The problem was that Imani did not find code beautiful. She found it obtuse, a dense thicket of syntax that obscured the only thing that actually mattered. She tried. She sat in the lab once at her father's insistence while Malik tried to explain a recursive function. Her eyes glazed over. She did not care how the function worked. She cared why it was needed. What human problem was it solving? Who was on the other side of the screen? While her family worshipped the elegance of the machine, Imani was obsessed with the messy, unpredictable emotional needs of the user. In her mind, the most brilliant algorithm in the world was just digital garbage if it did not make a person's life simpler, better, or more connected. This difference defined her. Malik, in a moment of cutting accuracy, had given her a label that stuck. "Imani isn't a tech person," he announced one night at dinner, after she asked what the point of one of his projects was. "She's the artist." He meant it as an insult, and in their house it landed as one. To them, artist was a synonym for illogical, emotional, vague. It meant she dealt in the soft, frivolous world of feelings, not the hard, essential world of data and logic. It was a dismissal, a neat box to put her in so they no longer had to take her questions seriously. She was just the artist, the one who made things pretty but did not understand the real work. Her parents adopted the term with relief. It explained her. The favoritism which had always been present now became blatant. They operated on two completely different scales of achievement. When Malik at 16 competed in a university-level hackathon, her parents took the entire weekend off. They sat in the back of the auditorium for 24 straight hours, bringing him coffee and granola bars, watching him code with the intensity of parents at the Olympic finals. He won third place. They framed the certificate. 2 months later, Imani, a high school sophomore, led her team to win the state-level business debate championship. She had researched for weeks, crafting a 90-page business plan for a hypothetical biotech startup. She had argued against seniors and won. She came home clutching a heavy, gleaming gold trophy, her throat raw from speaking. Her mother was checking email at the kitchen counter. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said, barely looking up. "Put it on the shelf." Her father walked in, saw the trophy, and gave her a quick one-armed hug. "Good job, Kung." Then he turned to her mother. "Did Malik fix that network bug he was working on?" The conversation moved on. The trophy felt cold and heavy in her hands. That night she sat in her room, the trophy on her desk, and felt a hot, acidic anger rising in her chest. It was an anger she had to swallow again and again. It was the sharp, painful realization that they were blind. They were celebrating the building of a faster engine, while Imani was the only one asking where the car was supposed to go. She looked at the closed door of the lab down the hall. A quiet, furious thought formed in her mind, a vow that would become the blueprint for her entire life. Don't they see? Technology is meaningless if it doesn't touch people. You can build the most perfect machine, but if I am the one who understands the person who uses it, I am the one who holds the real power. There was one place, one person exempt from the family's religion of logic. Nana Ilara, her maternal grandmother. Nana was a retired librarian, a woman whose entire life was a celebration of the analog world. Her house smelled of old paper, lemon oil polish, and strong black tea. While Imani's parents had shelves of technical manuals, Nana Ilara's walls were lined with fiction poetry and sprawling epic histories. She was the only person in their lives who never once compared the two siblings. She saw them as separate, complete individuals, not as a genius and his shadow. Imani remembered one afternoon when she was 17 years old, the sting of her family's judgment still fresh and agonizing. She had pedaled her bike furiously through the rain to Nana's house, bursting through the front door, tears streaming down her face, sobs choking her. She had made the catastrophic mistake of sharing an idea during dinner. It was an idea for an application, a platform to help match volunteers with local charities based on skills and availability. She had been excited, passionate. Malik had not just dismissed it, he had dissected it with surgical cruelty. Volunteers, he had scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Imani, that's just a pipe dream. It's a non-profit idea with no revenue model. You have absolutely no technical understanding of the database architecture you'd need. It's just a feeling. He had turned to their father. She's just drawing pretty pictures again. Her parents had said nothing. Their silence was its own sharp agreement. Imani sat on Nana Ilara's plush floral sofa, wiping her nose on the tissue her grandmother handed her. Nana did not coddle. She let Imani cry for a full 10 minutes, sitting opposite her in a wingback chair, simply waiting. When the sobs subsided, Nana stood up and walked to her bookshelf. She pulled down a thick hardcover book. It was not code. It was a collection of biographies about trailblazing female entrepreneurs. Malik is a bright boy, Nana said, her voice calm and even. She placed the book in Imani's lap. But his mind is a hammer. It is very, very good at hitting nails. But that does not mean the whole world is made of nails. Imani looked down at the cover. Different minds solve different problems, Imani. Nana continued, sitting back down. He understands how to build the engine. You understand where the road needs to go. They are both necessary, but do not ever. Nana leaned forward, her gaze sharp and insistent. Let anyone tell you your way of seeing is not worthy, especially not the people who are supposed to love you most. That afternoon, something settled in Imani's chest. The anger did not disappear, but it crystallized. It turned from a hot, messy emotion into something cold, hard, and focused. Nana's living room, with its scent of paper and tea, became more than a sanctuary. It became her headquarters. That book became her manual. She realized she did not need their approval. She did not need their validation. She just needed to build. The great divergence happened when Imani turned 18. Malik naturally fulfilled the prophecy. He was accepted to Stanford on a full academic scholarship for computer science. To her parents, this was the ultimate validation. Their methods, their values, their entire worldview had been proven correct. They threw a party that was less a graduation party and more a coronation. The house was filled with their peers, other senior engineers and data scientists, all raising glasses to the future, to Malik. Her father gave a speech, his voice thick with pride about Malik's singular, focused mind. Imani smiled until her face ached, refilling chip bowls, a ghost at her own brother's triumph. A few months later, Imani made her own announcement. She had been accepted to the University of Washington. She had very deliberately chosen her major business administration with a specialization in technology and information systems. She told them over dinner on a Tuesday. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the sound of forks on plates. "Oh," her father finally said, taking a sip of water. "UW, that's a good school, a very good state school." "And business," her mother added, searching for the right word. "Well, that's very practical, Kung." Practical. Not brilliant, not visionary, not genius. Just practical. The word hung in the air, a final judgment. They were not disappointed because they had never expected anything from her in the first place. They were relieved. She would be safe. She would get a sensible job. She was no longer a variable they needed to solve for. They had written her off. As Imani drove away to her dorm that fall, the Seattle skyline rising in front of her, she did not feel angry. She did not feel sad. She felt an exhilarating, terrifying lightness. The crushing burden of their expectations, a weight she had been failing to lift her entire life, was finally gone. They had released her. By labeling her practical, they had accidentally given her the one thing she truly needed: freedom. She soared. For the first time, she was not Malik's sister. She was just Imani. She dove into her classes, and the world clicked into place. She discovered she had a unique gift. While the pure engineering students built complex algorithms, they could not explain why anyone would buy them. And while the pure business students dreamed up grand market strategies, they had no idea how the technology actually worked. Imani stood in the middle. She was the bridge. She was the translator. She could speak both languages fluently. She could understand the deep architecture of a system, and in the same breath articulate its exact value proposition to a non-technical customer. This, she realized, was not a weakness. It was not a soft skill. It was a superpower. The prophecy continued to fulfill itself after college. Malik, armed with his Stanford degree, walked directly into a high six-figure engineering position at Apex.io, a rapidly rising star in the enterprise software space. His success was, as always, loud, immediate, and celebrated. Imani, with her practical business degree, took an equally practical job. She became a product manager at a respectable mid-level software company. It was a solid, safe, and completely unglamorous career path in her family's eyes. The inevitable comparison came, of course, at another dinner. It was the first time they were both home after starting their new jobs. Malik was already complaining in that bragging way of his about the legacy code at Apex.io. "It's just spaghetti," he said, gesturing with his fork. "The whole architecture is a mess. I'll probably have to rewrite the main kernel myself." Her father nodded approvingly. "That's how you make your mark, son." He then turned to Imani. "And you, Imani, product manager. What exactly does that entail?" Imani felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She took a breath, determined to be clear and professional. "I work with the users to understand their problems," she explained. "Then I define the strategy and the features for the engineering team. I'm the bridge. I make sure what we are building is actually what the customer needs and will pay for." Malik let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure condescension. "Ah, product management," he said, setting his fork down as if preparing for a lecture. "Right. I work with PMs every day." He looked at their parents, explaining his sister to them as if she were a curious specimen. "That's where they put the people who understand the business side but can't actually build anything. They make the slide decks." Her mother gave a small understanding "Oh." Imani's face flushed hot. "That's not what I do, Malik. I define the product roadmap. It's strategic." "It's talking," Malik countered, waving his hand dismissively. "We the engineers do the building, the real work, the hard work." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a tone of final brotherly advice. "Real tech people code, Imani. Everything else what you do, it's just a supporting role." A supporting role. The words landed like a slap. He had relegated her once again to the sidelines of the real story. She looked at her plate, the food suddenly tasteless. She didn't argue, She didn't cry. She just made a promise to herself, a cold, sharp point of certainty in her mind. Supporting role, she thought, the words echoing. I'll show you who the supporting role is. Malik's words burrowed under her skin, a toxic splinter she could not quite extract. Supporting role. For months she wrestled with it. The insecurity was a familiar heavy coat she wore in every engineering review. She found herself over-preparing for meetings, arming herself with triple-checked data just to hold her ground against the casual arrogance of the developers who, like her brother, saw her as a non-technical impediment. They wanted to build what was complex and interesting. She was the one forced to remind them to build what was useful and profitable. But the friction of that role forged her. She became sharper, more observant. She learned to see the patterns her engineering counterparts missed. They were obsessed with the how, but she was the only one interrogating the why. She saw where user frustration was costing the company millions. She saw the gaping holes in the market that everyone else was ignoring because the solutions were not elegant enough. She realized her skill, this soft ability to understand human psychology and market systems, was not a supporting role at all. It was the only thing that gave the code its value. The engineers were building the engine. She was the one drawing the map and, most importantly, selling the tickets. The real shift came 6 months later at a massive tech conference in Las Vegas. It was the industry's biggest event, a sprawling, chaotic sea of thousands. 90% of the attendees, it seemed, were men in identical company polos and expensive sneakers, all talking about disruption and scale. Imani felt the familiar isolation, the artist, in a building full of engineers. She was in a breakout session on back-end architecture, a deeply technical talk she was forcing herself to attend, when she noticed another woman. She was the only other black woman in a room of about 200 people. This woman, who had an engineer's laptop covered in coding stickers, let out a quiet, exasperated sigh at something the speaker said. Imani met her gaze across the aisle. They shared a brief, knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of the same absurdity. That evening, Imani saw her again at the crowded hotel bar. She walked over. "You're not a fan of decentralized monoliths either, huh?" The woman laughed, a warm, rich sound. "I'm not a fan of men calling a buggy, unscalable mess visionary. I'm Kayla." They talked for 2 hours. It was not just talk. It was a download. Kayla was a brilliant full-stack developer, a true builder by Malik's definition. And she was suffocating. She was tired of the bro culture, tired of having her ideas dismissed, and most of all tired of building bad products. "Here's the entire problem," Kayla said, grabbing a cocktail napkin and a pen. "Enterprise software is designed by developers for developers. They love complexity, they love features, they don't care about the user experience because they are not the user." Imani felt a jolt, a spark of electricity. She picked up the pen. "You're exactly right. But the end user isn't a developer. The end user is a nurse in a hospital or an accountant at tax time who just wants the damn thing to work. They don't care about the architecture." Kayla pointed her pen at Imani. "Yes, exactly, they're stuck. The engineers won't listen to the users and the business strategists." She used air quotes, "don't understand the code, so everyone just builds layered garbage." Imani looked at the napkin. She looked at Kayla. What if they didn't have to? She drew a simple diagram, a circle labeled user, a box labeled code, and she drew a bridge connecting them. What if the bridge wasn't a supporting role? What if the bridge was the entire product? They stared at the napkin. The noise of the bar faded. This was it. A human-centric integration platform. A system designed not for the IT department, but for the human being using it. Nexus Path was born on that napkin. The idea on that napkin consumed every spare moment they had. For 6 months, Imani and Kayla met every night and every weekend. They built a detailed business plan, a technical demo, and a product roadmap. Imani was the strategic architect, and Kayla was the lead engineer. They pitched their idea to venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, an experience Imani found both terrifying and empowering. They were rejected 12 times. But on the 13th try, a firm saw the vision. They saw the bridge Imani was building. They received $500,000 in seed funding. Imani looked at the number on the contract written out in numerals and in words and felt a wave of vertigo. It was real. It was no longer an idea. It was a company. That night, she and Kayla sat in Imani's small apartment, splitting a cheap bottle of champagne amid containers of Chinese takeout. $500,000? Kayla said, her voice full of awe. They actually gave us $500,000, Imani. Imani's euphoria was suddenly replaced by a sharp, icy spike of absolute terror. Kayla, what if we fail? She said, her voice barely a whisper. What if we burn all this money and build nothing? What if Malik was right? What if I am just the one who talks? Kayla put her glass down and looked Imani dead in the eye, her gaze firm. Yeah, we might fail. We probably will. But what if we succeed? What if we actually build this thing? What if we change how people work? Sometimes Imani's success is its own answer. Fortified by Kayla's words, Imani knew what she had to do next. She had to burn the bridge back to her practical life. She scheduled a dinner with her family. She made the announcement after the appetizers. I have some news, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've given my notice at my job. I'm starting my own company. Her parents' reaction was exactly what she expected. It was not excitement or pride. It was middle-class anxiety. Imani, honey, her mother said, setting down her fork. Quitting your job? What about your health insurance? What about your student loans? How will you pay your rent? That's a huge risk, Imani, her father added. The economy is unstable. Your job is a good job. And then Malik. Malik, who had been silent smiling, began to chuckle. It was not a happy sound. It was a deep, pitying laugh. Oh, wow, Imani, he said, shaking his head like she was a foolish child. Another tech startup. He turned to their parents. She's serious. You're actually doing this. He looked back at her, the smile gone replaced by the look of a lecturing professor. Imani, do you have any idea what the failure rate for tech startups is? 90% are gone in the first year. 90%. He picked up his wine glass. I mean, good luck, little sister. You're going to need it. Just don't come to me when you're broke in 6 months. Imani felt a cold clarity settle over her. She had planned to tell them about the funding. She had planned to explain the business model, but looking at Malik's smug face and her parents' worried, doubtful expressions, she made a decision that would define the next 8 years of her life. She was not going to tell them anything. She would give them no target to shoot at. She would give them no data to criticize. She would give them no hopes to dash. She smiled. Thanks for the advice, Malik. I'll keep that in mind. Her internal monologue was sharp and clear. It is better to be underestimated by them than to face their constant draining skepticism. They think this is a hobby. Let them, until it is not. Imani did not sign the lease on their tiny new office, a 2-room space above a coffee shop, until she had done one more thing. She drove to Nana Alara's house. She needed an anchor. She needed to say the words aloud to one person who would not treat her like a fool or a charity case. She sat on the familiar floral sofa, the scent of old books and lemon polish settling her nerves. Nana handed her a cup of strong black tea. You have that look in your eye, child, Nana said. The one you get before you make a very smart, very big decision. Imani took a deep breath. And she told her everything. Not the practical version she gave her parents. She told her the truth. She told her about Malik's supporting role comment, the white-hot anger it had sparked. She told her about meeting Kayla, the shared frustration, the electric moment of connection. She told her about the napkin, the business plan, the 12 rejections, and the agonizing self-doubt. And then she said the words. They said yes, Nana. A VC firm in Palo Alto. We signed the papers. They gave us $500,000. Imani watched her grandmother's face, braced for shock or anxiety, or even confusion. Nana Ilara did none of those things. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. She placed the cup back on its saucer with a quiet click. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. "Well," she said, her voice rich with satisfaction, "it's about time. I knew you had that in you, Imani." There was no panic, no questions about health insurance, just absolute immediate validation. Then Nana's eyes sharpened. She leaned forward, the kindness replaced by a keen, penetrating intelligence. 500,000, that's your seed round. Good. But their valuation is probably low. They always lowball first-time founders, especially Black women. What terms did you agree to? What's your business model? Not the mission statement, the model. How do you make money? Imani, stunned, found herself in the most rigorous business meeting of her life. For the next hour, Nana Ilara, the retired librarian, grilled her. She asked about customer acquisition costs. She asked about the total addressable market, the burn rate, and the timeline for their minimum viable product. She understood the concepts with a clarity that shocked Imani. "How do you know all of this?" Imani finally asked, baffled. Nana scoffed. "I was a librarian, child, not a statue. I read. I managed the library's endowment fund for 10 years. I know a good investment when I see one." She stood up, walked to her small, organized writing desk, and took out a checkbook. "And this is a good investment." Imani's heart jumped. "Nana, no, please, that's not why I came. We have the VC money, we are funded. I just wanted you to know." Nana held up a hand, silencing her. She sat back down, her gaze firm, almost stern. "Imani, do not insult me. I am not offering you a handout. I am not your mother worrying about your rent. I am an investor, and I am telling you that I want in on the ground floor." She clicked her pen. "I believe in you. I believe in your partner, Kayla, and I believe in this idea. This is not charity. This is business." She began to write. "I am investing $25,000. Imani's eyes filled with tears. $25,000 was a significant amount of money for her grandmother. It was not a sweet gesture. It was a roar of belief. It was the loudest, clearest vote of confidence she had ever received in her entire life. "Say yes, Imani," Nana said, her voice softer now. "And you tell your lawyer to send me the shareholder agreement. I want my name on the cap table. I want the stock certificates." Imani laughed through her tears and nodded. "Okay, Nana. Okay. Yes." As Imani got up to leave, the signed check warm in her hand, she felt a profound shift. She was no longer just a daughter or a sister. She was a CEO with her first and most important believer. "One last piece of advice," Nana said, walking her to the door. "Do not say a word of this to your parents or to Malik." "But they'll find out eventually," Imani said. "Yes, they will," Nana said, her smile turning cunning. "But you will not tell them. You have work to do. Do not waste one single ounce of your energy justifying your existence to them. Let them think what they want. Let them think this is your little hobby. Let them underestimate you. It is the greatest weapon you possess. Some lessons, Imani, are best learned through profound, undeniable surprise. So, let them be surprised." The first year of Nexus Path was a blur of cheap coffee code and crippling anxiety. Their office was the two-room space above the coffee shop, a space that perpetually smelled of burnt espresso beans and stale pastries. They were a team of 12 desperate, brilliant, overworked people who had all bought into Imani and Kayla's napkin-sized dream. They worked on folding tables. The main server hummed loudly in a repurposed closet. Imani and Kayla worked 90-hour weeks, fueled by the dwindling seed money and the terrifying unspoken fear of that 90% failure rate Malik had so gleefully quoted. Imani lived in a state of suspended animation. Her entire life was a brutal, relentless grind. They built the product, tore it down, and rebuilt it again from scratch. Imani was the chief executive officer, the head of product, the lead saleswoman, and on Tuesdays the person who cleaned the tiny office bathroom. Then at month 11, just as the bank account was dipping into the terrifying red, they got the call. A major regional healthcare provider, a network of hospitals struggling with a disastrously clunky and inefficient patient management system, wanted a demo. Imani and Kayla flew to their headquarters. They walked into a massive boardroom filled with skeptical, gray-faced executives who looked at them like they were children. Imani presented. She did not talk about the elegance of their code. She talked about the nurses, the scheduling assistants, the actual human beings trying to use their terrible software. She talked about patient wait times and administrative burnout. She showed them how Nexus Path was a bridge, not a barrier. They signed the contract 2 weeks later. It was a 3-year, 7-figure deal. It was not just a win. It was life. It was validation. Throughout this entire inferno, Imani kept her vow of absolute silence. Her family remained completely in the dark. At the obligatory holiday dinners and Sunday phone calls, she was a master of deflection. "How's that little project going, Kung?" Her mother would ask, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle pity. "It's keeping me busy, Mom," Imani would say, her voice bright and empty. "Still working on that little app of yours?" Malik would ask at Christmas, a knowing smirk in his voice. "Haven't run out of money yet?" "Something like that," she'd reply, smiling. "We're holding on." They took her silence and her vague answers as proof of her inevitable quiet failure. She could see the pity in their eyes, the unspoken, "I told you so," sitting on Malik's lips. They were just waiting for her to come home defeated, ready to finally admit her practical limits and take a real job. Late one night in the office after closing the healthcare deal, Kayla looked at Imani, who was staring at the framed, signed contract on their wall. "You know you could just tell them," Kayla said quietly. "You could call Malik and tell him to shove that 90% failure rate." Imani shook her head. She looked at the names of her 12 employees on their small whiteboard. "No, not yet." "Why not?" Kayla asked. "You deserve to. We deserve to." "Because I want to succeed or fail on my own terms," Imani said, her voice low and intense. "I have lived my entire life with their running commentary, with Malik's ratings and my parents' comparisons. This." She gestured around the small, messy office. "This one thing, this is mine, it's ours. I don't want their judgment or their skepticism or even their advice. If we fail, I don't want to hear them say they knew we would." She looked at Kayla, a hard, determined light in her eyes. "And if we succeed, well, the reveal is going to be so much sweeter." While Imani was forging her company in secret, her personal life was developing on a parallel, more traditional track. She had met Jordan 2 years prior. He was handsome, ambitious, and stable. He worked in finance, a man who understood numbers on a balance sheet and the clear, logical progression of a career. He was everything her family would have approved of had they been paying attention. A year into their relationship, he proposed. Imani, caught up in a life that felt separate from her grueling work, said yes. But the secrecy was a corrosive acid on their relationship. Nexus Path was a black hole consuming her nights, her weekends, her very essence. And Jordan, a man of facts and figures, was left on the outside with nothing but questions. They were at a restaurant he loved, a place with dark wood leather chairs and $1,000 bottles of wine on the wall. It was his world. He had been quiet through the first course, his jaw tight. Finally, he put his fork down. "Imani, I don't understand," he said, his voice low and strained. "We are supposed to be building a life together. We're getting married in 8 months. And yet you are completely absent. You work all night, every night on this project." He used the word project, just like her family did. It was a word meant to diminish, to box it into something small and temporary. "It's a company, Jordan, not a project," she said, her defensiveness rising instantly. "Is it?" he countered, leaning forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it's just a vampire. It takes all of your time, and I see nothing in return. You're exhausted. You're stressed. You won't even talk about it. He paused, then asked the question that was really bothering him. Are you even making any money from this, at all? Or is it just draining your savings? Imani felt the familiar hot sting of being underestimated. She thought of the 7-figure healthcare contract locked in her desk drawer. She thought of the 12 employees whose salaries she paid. It's growing, Jordan, she said, her voice cold. These things take time. You know that. I know business, he said, his frustration evident. I know investments. What I don't know is this secrecy. He sighed, and his tone softened, which was somehow worse. He reached across the table and took her hand. His hand was warm, his grip possessive. Imani, baby, why are you doing this to yourself? He asked, his voice now a gentle, reasonable plea. Why don't you just give it up? She stared at him, pulling her hand back slowly. Give it up? Yes, just let it go. I make more than enough money for both of us. You don't need this struggle. He smiled, a kind, loving, utterly clueless smile. Let me take care of you. You can focus on the wedding. You can find a nice simple job if you want, something 9 to 5. But this obsession, it's not healthy. She looked at him, and in that moment the man she loved dissolved. He was replaced by a perfect echo of her family. He was Malik telling her it was just a supporting role. He was her mother calling it a little company. He was her father dismissing her as practical. They all had the same message: don't try, be small, be safe. Let the real players handle the world. He thought he was offering her love, but what he was offering her was a cage. A comfortable, beautiful, expensive cage. He loved her, she realized with a sinking cold certainty. But he did not believe in her. He did not see her. He saw a woman to be provided for, not a partner to build an empire with. And for the first time, she felt a profound, lonely distance from him that had nothing to do with her long hours at the office. The healthcare contract was not a win. It was a catalyst. It was the proof of concept that blew the doors off their modest projections. After that, Nexus Path did not just grow, it detonated. The market, it turned out, was starved for a human-centric platform, and Imani had built the only one. Within a year, they were no longer 12 people above a coffee shop. Imani and Kayla went out for their Series A round of funding. They did not get 12 rejections. They started a bidding war. They closed the round in 6 weeks. The final number was $10 million at a $40 million valuation. With that money, they moved. They left the cramped espresso-scented rooms and took over 2 full floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, just 6 blocks from where Imani now stood in her own CEO office. They hired 50 new employees in 90 days. And the world began to notice. The hobby was now a recognized industry force. A lengthy article appeared in TechCrunch, the Bible of the tech world. It featured a large professional photo of Imani and Kayla. The headline called Nexus Path, the quiet company to watch solving the human problem everyone else ignored. Imani read the article on her phone, her heart hammering. She was now officially a public figure in her industry. She briefly considered sending the link to her family. But Nana's voice echoed in her head. Let them be surprised. She closed the tab. The growth only accelerated. Their platform was adopted by 3 Fortune 500 companies. 18 months after their Series A, Imani led their Series B. The numbers were staggering. They raised $60 million at a pre-money valuation of $200 million. Nexus Path was no longer just a company to watch. It was a powerhouse. Imani was on paper extraordinarily wealthy. Nana Ilara's $25,000 investment was now worth millions. Imani's life became a split screen. By day, she was a celebrated CEO, managing a board of powerful investors and a staff of hundreds. By night, at family dinners, she was still the artist, the one with the little project that was, everyone assumed, limping along. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. It was at another conference, this one in Austin, that the two halves of her world began to collide. She was in a VIP lounge, and she overheard two senior engineers from a rival company talking. They were not talking about Nexus Path. They were talking about Apex.io. "The whole place is a dumpster fire," one engineer said, stirring his drink. "Their core architecture is a monolith from 2010. It's brittle. It can't handle modern API requests." "I heard," the other replied. "They're losing clients left and right. That VP of engineering they hired a few years back, the genius kid, apparently he just kept building on top of the old code. He made it worse. They're stuck. Completely stuck." Imani stood very still, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. The genius kid, Malik. Her brother, the prodigy, the one who did the real work, had built a technical prison. He had built something that could not scale, that could not adapt. He was a hammer, just as Nana had said, and he had treated a complex, evolving system like a nail. A cold, sharp feeling settled in her stomach. It was not triumph, not yet. It was the metallic taste of inevitability. The clock was ticking down. The rumors about Apex.io were a distant abstract problem until a Tuesday afternoon in March, 2 weeks before Easter. Imani was in a deep strategy session with her marketing team when her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Imani, Kayla needs to see you in her office. She said it's urgent." Imani felt a prickle of alarm. Kayla, who was now their chief financial officer as well as chief operating officer, did not use the word urgent lightly. She ran the financial and legal side of Nexus Path with the precision of a surgeon. Imani excused herself and walked down the hall to the finance wing. Kayla was standing by her window, her arms crossed. She did not turn around when Imani entered. "Close the door," she said. Imani closed it. The sound of the heavy wood clicking shut seemed to suck the air out of the room. "What's wrong, Kayla?" Kayla finally turned. Her face was not worried. It was rigid with a controlled, cold anger. "Our legal team just flagged a hard credit inquiry that came through our compliance monitoring." Kayla said, her voice clipped and formal. "It was triggered yesterday. Someone attempted to take out a $50,000 business loan from a third-tier lender." Imani was confused. "We didn't apply for a loan. We're flooded with cash. Is it a mistake?" "It's not a mistake," Kayla said. She tapped her keyboard, and a document appeared on the large monitor on her wall. It was a loan application. Someone tried to use Nexus Path's corporate name as the primary guarantor for the loan. Imani stepped closer, her blood turning to ice water. The applicant's name was not Nexus Path. The applicant's name was Malik, her brother. "Imani," Kayla said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its edge. "The application was denied, but it was submitted with a digital signature purporting to be you as the guaranteeing officer." On the screen was a scan of the signature page, and there it was. Her name, Imani. It was her signature, but it was off. It was slightly pixelated, copied and pasted from another document. She had a sick flash of recognition. It was from a birthday card she had co-signed with him for their mother 3 years ago. He had scanned it. He had kept it. "He tried to borrow $50,000, Imani said, her voice a dead flat whisper. She read the application's details. The loan was for a new venture, a revolutionary crypto trading application. It was a failure before it even began. The bank had seen that. But they had also seen the Nexus Path name and run the credit check. "It's fraud, Imani," Kayla said quietly. "He committed wire fraud and forgery using our company's identity." A cold, pure rage, unlike anything she had ever felt, settled over Imani. This was not the familiar hot frustration of being dismissed at the dinner table. This was not a family rivalry. This was not about supporting roles or little hobbies. This was a violation. He had not just insulted her. He had attacked her legacy. He had used her name, the name she had built from nothing, the name that employed hundreds of people to try and fund his own pathetic failing side hustle. He had put her entire company, her investors' trust, and her reputation at legal risk. He was not just an arrogant brother, he was a liability, he was a threat. Imani looked at Kayla. Lock it down. Have legal send a cease and desist to the lender and confirm the fraudulent application. I want a full audit of our credit monitoring, now. Done, Kayla said. Imani walked back to her office, the cold anger hardening into something new. Purpose. Her motivation, which for years had been about proving them wrong, crystallized in that moment. It was no longer about proving anything. It was about protecting what she had built from the very people who had belittled it. The Easter dinner, which she had been anticipating with a kind of nervous, triumphant dread, was no longer just a personal reveal. It was a corporate reckoning. The reckoning arrived sooner than she expected. It happened at the quarterly board meeting for Nexus Path held in their largest, most impressive conference room. Present were Imani, Kayla, and the 4 venture capitalists who sat on their board. They were discussing strategic acquisitions for the next fiscal year. Our growth is plateauing in the enterprise services sector, said Marcus, the lead investor from their Series C. We need to acquire a new tech stack to bolt onto our platform, open up a new vertical. Our M&A team has a short list. A slide appeared on the main screen. It listed 3 companies, all mid-level struggling tech firms with useful niche technology. Imani's heart stopped. The second name on the list was Apex.io. Apex.io, Marcus continued, is, as you all know, in financial trouble. But their workflow management tools are actually very solid if outdated. Their engineering team built a good product. They just built it on a crumbling foundation. They are desperate. We can pick them up for pennies on the dollar. Imani felt the blood drain from her face. She could feel all 4 investors looking at her, waiting for the CEO's opinion. Her mind raced, processing the news of Malik's fraud, the rumors of the company's collapse, and the sudden brutal intersection of her 2 worlds. She cleared her throat. Her voice came out steady cold. There is a complication I need to disclose, she said. The room went silent. A disclosure was serious. The vice president of engineering at Apex.io, Imani said, meeting Marcus's gaze, is my brother Malik. The investors looked at each other. This was messy. Family was always messy. Is that going to be a problem, Imani? Marcus asked, his voice neutral, but the question sharp. Imani thought of the $50,000 fraudulent loan application. She thought of a lifetime of being called a supporting role. She thought of Jordan's offer to take care of her. She thought of Nana's words. Let them be surprised. No, Imani said, her voice hard as steel. It is not a problem. It's a business decision, not a personal one. The team is right. Their tech is complementary to our platform, and their price is right precisely because their leadership. She put a slight, sharp emphasis on the word has failed to scale. It is a smart, strategic purchase. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied by her coldness. Good. Then we are in agreement. We will execute the acquisition. The final deal will be signed Friday. One request, Imani said. Name it. I ask that the public announcement be held until Monday morning, Imani said. Marcus shrugged. Fine by me. Any particular reason? I have a family dinner on Sunday, Imani said. I'd prefer to handle the personal disclosure in my own way before the press release hits. The board agreed. The deal was done. The bomb was set. Easter Sunday was just 4 days away. Easter Sunday dawned bright, clear, and cold. Imani woke up with a feeling of profound, icy calm. The dread that usually preceded this dinner was gone, replaced by the quiet focus of a general before a battle. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Kayla. Hey! Kayla's voice was warm. Just checking in. Are you ready for this? I think so, Imani said, looking out her window at the calm Seattle morning. Just remember, Kayla said, her voice turning practical. Malik did this to himself. The fraud, the mismanagement. That is his problem, not yours. You are just the solution. A very, very well-capitalized solution. Try to enjoy the dinner." Imani laughed a short, dry sound. "Enjoy. Right. I'll talk to you Monday, Kayla." She hung up and walked to her closet. She bypassed the power suits she lived in, the sharp blazers and tailored pants. Instead, she chose a dress. It was a simple, elegant sheath dress in a deep sapphire blue. It was silk understated and had cost more than her first car. It was not armor. It was a uniform. The uniform of a woman who no longer needed to explain herself. The drive to Nana Ilara's house was quiet. The streets were empty. As she drove the familiar route, her mind replayed a lifetime of these dinners, a highlight reel of her own diminishing. She remembered the endless suffocating monologues from Malik, his voice booming across the table explaining concepts her parents already understood, basking in their adoration. She remembered herself at 15, at 20, at 25, sitting in silence, invisible, practicing the art of shrinking. She remembered the precise, painful sting of her mother's little company comment, a wound that had never truly healed. Her mind drifted to Jordan, to his kind, dismissive plea. "Let me take care of you. Give it up." The memory was sharper, now more painful than Malik's insults. Malik was her rival. Jordan was supposed to be her partner. He too had looked at her ambition and seen it as a flaw, a hobby to be managed, until she was ready to settle down. The feeling of profound loneliness that washed over her was overwhelming. She was surrounded by people, a family, a fiancé, but she was utterly alone in her fight. They had all in their own way tried to put her in a box. The artist, the supporting role, the little project, the wife. Today she was arriving as the CEO. She pulled up to Nana Ilara's curb, the house looking exactly as it always had, comforting and timeless. She took one final deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. The calm settled over her again. She was not here to start a fight. She was here to end one. She got out of the car. Imani pushed open the familiar oak door. The house instantly enveloped her in the scent of roasted garlic, slow-cooked ham, and her Nana's lemon oil polish. It was the smell of every Easter, every Thanksgiving, every obligatory family gathering of her entire life. She could hear her father's loud laugh booming from the dining room, followed by Malik's equally confident voice. The scene was perfectly, painfully familiar. She stepped into the living room, and the conversation stopped. "Imani, you're here," her mother said, walking over to give her a light, papery kiss on the cheek. Her eyes scanned Imani's expensive silk dress with a flicker of confusion, but she defaulted to the usual script. "Oh, Imani," she said, her voice full of that gentle, well-meaning pity. "How is that little company of yours? Are you still managing to hold on?" "It's fine, Mom," Imani said, smiling. "We're doing just fine." "That's good, Kung," her father said, clapping her on the shoulder. His attention, however, was clearly elsewhere. He was vibrating with excitement. He raised his glass of wine. "Everyone, a little announcement before we sit down. Your brother here has some incredible news." Malik was standing by the fireplace, leaning against the mantel, a picture of casual success. His girlfriend Deja stood beside him, looking both proud and slightly uncomfortable. "Our Malik," her father announced, his voice swelling, "has just been promoted to Vice President of Engineering at Apex IO, the youngest vice president in the company's entire history." A round of applause filled the room. Her parents looked at Malik with a blinding, absolute adoration. Malik soaked it in, raising his own glass in a mock toast. "Well," he said, "someone has to do the real work, right?" His eyes found Imani's across the room, a familiar, condescending smirk playing on his lips. He was waiting for her to be impressed, to be jealous, to shrink. Imani simply smiled back, a calm, unbothered smile. "That's truly impressive, Malik. Congratulations." Her lack of a fawning reaction seemed to bother him more than an argument would have. Before he could respond, Nana Ilara's hand was on her arm. Her grandmother steered her quietly toward the kitchen. My secret entrepreneur is here, Nana whispered, her voice low and conspiratorial, as she pretended to check a pot on the stove. She looked at Imani, her sharp eyes taking in the expensive dress and the new, steely calm in her granddaughter's posture. Are you all right, child? You look like you're about to sign a treaty, not eat a meal. Imani looked at the one person in the world who truly saw her. I'm nervous, Nana, she admitted in a whisper. But I'm also ready. Nana Ilara patted her hand. Good, she said, her smile turning fierce. Dinner is served. Imani was trying to help Nana Ilara with the salad bowls when she felt a hand clamp down on her arm harder than necessary. It was Jordan. His face was pale, his smile a tight, unnatural grimace. Imani, he said, his voice a low command. I need to talk to you. Outside. Now. Before she could answer, he was steering her through the living room, past her parents, past Malik, and out onto the cold front porch. The spring air was sharp and a tense, awful silence hung between them. Jordan was not looking at her. He was staring at the house across the street, his jaw working. Jordan, what is wrong? She asked, though she already felt the cold tendrils of a new disaster. I did something, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Our joint wedding account. I saw your personal accounts linked on the bank portal. I looked at your balances. Imani said nothing. She felt a profound sense of violation, a betrayal that was almost as sharp as Malik's. He finally turned to face her, his eyes dark with a mixture of confusion and a raw, burning anger. You have millions, Imani. Not a little. Not growing. Millions. Sitting in a checking account. Why? Why did you lie to me? I didn't lie, Jordan, she said, her own voice turning cold, her defense mechanisms snapping into place. I just didn't tell you. It's my company. It's complicated. Complicated. He exploded, his voice no longer quiet. It was a harsh, choked sound of pure humiliation. Complicated. I propose to you. I am going to marry you in 8 months, and you let me. You let me sit at dinner tables and listen to your family mock your little project. You let me tell you to give up your hobby. He was pacing now, a frantic, angry energy coming off him in waves. I asked you to let me take care of you. I offered to pay your bills while you were sitting on how much? 10 million, 20. He ran his hands through his hair, his face contorted. You didn't just lie to me, Imani. You made me look like an absolute idiot. Imani stared at him, the last vestiges of her affection for him dissolving in the cold air. The betrayal he felt was nothing compared to the one she was feeling. I didn't make you look like an idiot, Jordan, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. You did that yourself. You never asked me if I was successful. You just assumed I wasn't. You treated me like a child, just like they do. You saw a hobby because that's all you wanted to see. Imani. He started, his anger faltering, replaced by a dawning panic. Dinner. Nana Ilara's voice called from the open doorway, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. Everyone to the table. Now. Jordan looked at her, his eyes pleading. Imani just looked through him, her face a mask of cold resolve. The battle she had planned for one person had just become a battle for two. The tension at the dinner table was a thick, unbreathable fog. Imani and Jordan sat side by side, two rigid statues, a vast, cold canyon between them. Her parents, oblivious, were buzzing with pride. And Malik, fueled by his promotion and the unchecked adoration of his parents, was in rare form. He dominated the entire conversation, his voice the only one that mattered. The problem, he announced, gesturing grandly with his fork, was that the entire legacy system at Apex.io was a complete mess. Just spaghetti code, no discipline. The original engineers had no vision. Her father nodded seriously. It's a common problem, a lack of architectural foresight. Exactly, Malik said, encouraged. So for the last 8 months, I've been on a rescue mission. I personally spearheaded the redesign. I had to tear down the entire old architecture and rebuild it from the ground up. It was a brutal 24/7 job, but I stabilized it. I saved the core product. Imani felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat, and she choked it down with a sip of water. She stared at her plate, her internal monologue a cold factual correction. We did our due diligence. We read every line of his code. He didn't redesign anything. His rescue mission was a series of frantic temporary patches. He put a bandage on a gunshot wound. That stabilization actually slowed down all API calls by 6 months, and it's the main reason their biggest client just canceled their contract. She looked up, her gaze flat. He has no idea. He's sitting here bragging about being the VP of a company that is actively sinking, a company that just sold itself for parts to avoid bankruptcy, a company that I now own. Across the table, Malik's girlfriend Deja shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Imani had noted her before. She was quiet with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to be taking in everything. She had the look of an engineer herself, someone who understood the language. When Malik claimed he redesigned the architecture, Deja's eyes flickered down to her plate, and she took a very deliberate sip of wine. She knew he was exaggerating. She might even know the truth. But Malik, lost in his own glory, did not notice. He was the hero of his own story, the conquering genius. It was the kind of work, he concluded, looking pointedly at Imani, that not everyone is cut out for. An awkward, heavy silence settled over the table. Malik's pronouncement hung in the air, a monument to his own ego. Jordan was staring at his plate, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. Her parents were beaming at their son. Finally, a great-aunt from her father's side, a kind woman named Rose, seemed to sense the imbalance. She turned to Imani with a polite, inclusive smile. "And what about you, Imani?" she asked, her voice a pleasant change from Malik's booming tones. "We haven't heard from you. How is your work going, dear?" Before Imani could even open her mouth, Malik let out a short, condescending laugh. "Oh, Aunt Rose," he said, waving his hand as if to clear the air of a silly question. "Imani's little startup is just a hobby, something to keep her busy." Imani, who had been looking at her aunt, did not turn to Malik. She kept her gaze politely on Aunt Rose and smiled, her voice perfectly calm and clear. "We're actually doing pretty well, Aunt Rose. Thank you for asking. We just expanded to over 100 employees." The number landed on the table with a quiet, heavy thud. 100. Not a few. Her mother's eyes widened slightly. Her father paused, his wine glass halfway to his lips. Even Jordan looked up, his angry expression flickering with fresh surprise. Malik was visibly annoyed. He had lost control of the narrative. He scoffed, scrambling to reassert his dominance. 100. He shook his head. "I'm sure they're just contract workers in India or something. It's not the same as managing a high-level domestic engineering team." He set his fork down, ready to deliver his closing argument. He looked around the table, his gaze landing finally on Imani, a look of profound, patronizing pity in his eyes. "It's like I was saying," he continued, his voice dripping with superiority. "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. It's not just about ideas or managing. It's about a rigorous, logical, and deeply complex skill set. It simply takes a certain kind of mind." His meaning was clear. His mind, not hers. He had once again dismissed her entire life's work as a frivolous, inferior pursuit. Imani did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply held his gaze, her expression unreadable, calm, and absolutely still. The silence that followed was different. It was taut, electric. The silence that followed Malik's decree was absolute. It was suffocating. Malik leaned back in his chair, victorious, the undisputed king of the table. Her parents looked proud, their family's intellectual hierarchy confirmed once again. Jordan was a statue of pale, rigid anger, staring at his own hands, and Imani was a mirror reflecting nothing, perfectly still. Into this vacuum, a new sound emerged. It was small, delicate, but it cut through the tension with the precision of a diamond. Nana Ilara cleared her throat. It was not a cough. It was an announcement. Every head at the table, including Malik's, snapped to her. She sat at the head of the table, the picture of a benign, sweet grandmother, a gentle smile on her face. She ignored the rest of the room and fixed her warm, sharp gaze directly on Imani. Imani, Nana Alara said, her voice perfectly conversational, as if she were about to ask about the weather. Your company has been doing quite well lately, hasn't it? Imani felt a small electric spark. She knew this was the signal. She simply nodded. Yes, Nana, we have. Malik let out an audible, impatient sigh. He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. This was just another pointless diversion, another polite, time-wasting question about his sister's insignificant project. He was annoyed that his grand pronouncement had been interrupted by such triviality. He picked up his wineglass, ready to dismiss them both. Nana Alara's smile widened. It was a lovely, sweet, almost angelic smile. Her eyes twinkled. She did not take her gaze off Imani, but her next words were projected for the entire table to hear. That's wonderful, dear, she said, her voice still light as air. Is that why your company just bought his company? The silence was no longer just heavy. It was a vacuum, an absolute brittle void where sound had ceased to exist. Malik was frozen solid. His fork, halfway to his mouth, hung suspended in the air. The self-satisfied, condescending smirk was gone, wiped clean from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed, uncomprehending stare. His eyes were wide, fixed on his grandmother. He was the first to break. He let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that cracked in the dead quiet. What are you talking about, Nana? He stammered, his voice suddenly 2 octaves too high. Are you confused? Did you get your medications mixed up? He turned to his parents for support, but they were not looking at him. Every single person at the table, her mother, her father, Aunt Rose, a terrified-looking Deja, and a chalk-white Jordan, all turned their collective gaze away from Nana and locked onto Imani. She was the center. She felt the weight of their stare, the crushing pressure of a dozen questions. She did not flinch. With a calm, deliberate slowness, Imani placed her knife and fork neatly on her plate. The small click of silver against porcelain sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. She lifted her head and looked directly at Malik. Her gaze was not triumphant, not angry. It was factual. She's not confused, Malik, Imani said. Her voice was perfectly level, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. The deal was finalized on Friday. The acquisition will be complete next week. I was simply waiting for the official press announcement on Monday. Absolute chaos erupted. Acquisition! Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. What acquisition, Imani? What is she talking about? Her father just stared, his mouth hanging open. He looked back and forth between his son and his daughter, his mind visibly failing to process the words he was hearing. Malik's face turned a deep, blotchy, furious red. No, he said, shaking his head, his voice rising to a desperate shout. That is impossible. Your little startup, your hobby, Apex.io is worth. We are a major corporation. It was, Imani corrected him, her voice mercilessly precise, cutting straight through his panic. It is also critically in debt, and its core technology is obsolete. That's why we were able to acquire it. She paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the final fatal blow. Nexus Path closed our Series C funding round last month, Malik. We are currently valued at over $500 million. $500 million. The words echoed in the room, shattering the last of their old reality. Malik recoiled as if she had physically struck him. His wild, disbelieving eyes darted to the head of the table. You, he hissed at Nana Alara. You knew. This whole time, you knew. Nana, who had been watching the entire exchange with the serene satisfaction of someone watching the finale of a very good play, took a delicate sip of her iced tea. I may have made a small investment a few years ago, she said sweetly. I always knew Imani had a good head for business. Beside Imani, Jordan made a small choked sound, a gasp for air. He leaned in, his face bloodless, his eyes wide with a terror that was almost religious. Half, half a billion, he whispered, not to her, but to the universe. Oh my God, Imani! That was the end. The combination of his public failure, her unimaginable success, and his grandmother's perceived betrayal shattered his entire world. The identity he had built for 35 years was annihilated in 30 seconds. With a roar of pure, incoherent rage, he threw his napkin onto his plate, scattering food. He shoved his chair back from the table, the legs screeching horribly against the hardwood floor. No! He yelled, a raw, wounded sound. He stormed out of the dining room and slammed the front door so hard the windows of the house rattled in their frames. The chaos in the dining room was a tidal wave of overlapping, frantic questions. Her mother was crying. Her father was trying to get Jordan's attention, who was still frozen, staring at Imani with a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Aunt Rose was asking her father if Malik was all right, as if he had a stomach ache and not a shattered ego. Imani did not wait for the wave to crash. She placed her napkin on the table, stood up, and walked out of the room, her heels clicking with quiet finality on the hardwood floor. She found Malik on the front porch. He was not storming or pacing. He was crumpled. He was sitting on the top step, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in ragged, silent sobs. The genius was gone. The vice president was gone. He was just a man who had lost. He heard her footsteps and looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes filled with a raw, childish hatred. "You did this," he spat, his voice a broken whisper. "You planned this whole thing, this dinner, this announcement. You did it all just to humiliate me." Imani stood above him, framed by the light from the doorway. She felt a brief passing flicker of the old pity she used to feel for him. She extinguished it. "No," she said, her voice as cold and clear as the night air. "I didn't do this to you, Malik. You did this to yourself." "I saved that company," he insisted, his voice cracking. "No, you didn't," she countered, her voice devoid of emotion. "It was a business decision. Apex.io's workflow tools are complementary to our platform. We bought the technology, Malik, not the leadership. The company was sinking, and you were bragging about the view from the deck." His face contorted in renewed anger. "You don't know anything about—" "I know everything," Imani interrupted, and her voice dropped, losing all its previous warmth, becoming the voice of a CEO addressing a legal liability. "And business, Malik, also means cleaning up legal risks, like the $50,000 loan you tried to secure 2 weeks ago by forging my signature." The blood drained from his face. The anger, the hatred, the self-pity, it all evaporated, replaced by a pure animal fear. He was caught. The bank denied the loan, but the credit inquiry was flagged. Imani continued, a merciless narrator of his own failure. "Kayla and our legal team found the fraudulent signature, the one you lifted from Mom's birthday card 3 years ago. That investigation, Malik, is currently active." "Imani," he whispered a plea. I can explain. It was... "Don't," she said. "The investigation ends on Monday morning. Nexus Path will absorb the liability. We will make the bank whole. It will be deducted from your severance package." She paused, letting the word severance land. "Unless, of course, you decide to stay on, in a junior engineering role. A role that my CTO approves. You can work to pay it back. Your choice." She had not just taken his company. She had taken his pride, his future, and his freedom. He was trapped. He just stared at the porch steps, utterly and completely broken. The front door opened again, spilling light onto the porch. It was not her parents. It was Deja, Malik's girlfriend. She had a look of quiet intensity on her face. She walked past Malik as if he were a piece of furniture, her eyes fixed on Imani with a new dawning electric awe. "Wait," Deja said, her voice sharp and intelligent. "You're that Imani. You're Imani from Nexus Path." Imani, caught off guard, just nodded. "Oh my God," Deja said, a small amazed laugh escaping her. I've been following your work for a year. I read that TechCrunch article, the one about your adaptive API architecture. I'm a developer. Your approach to human systems integration, it's not just smart, it's genuinely brilliant. Imani stared at her. Deja was not trying to score points. She was a professional recognizing another professional. The words, however, landed on Malik like a physical blow. He actually flinched. This more than the money, more than the acquisition was his true humiliation. This was a peer, an engineer, a woman whose technical opinion he respected, telling him that his sister, the artist, the supporting role, was not just a better business person. She was a better technologist. He had been fundamentally wrong on every level for his entire life. He made a low, wounded sound and put his head back in his hands. Deja looked down at him with a brief flash of pity, then back up at Imani with something that looked like respect. Imani gave a small, tight nod of thanks to Deja and walked off the porch away from the wreckage. She was walking to her car, her keys already in her hand, when Jordan intercepted her at the walkway. He grabbed her arm, his grip frantic. "Imani, wait, please," he said, his voice high and panicked. He was pale, sweating in the cold. "Imani, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I had no idea." She just looked at him, her face unreadable. "$500 million," he whispered as if saying the number would make it real. He was looking at her, but she could see the calculations spinning in his eyes. He was seeing his own future, his own opportunities. "My God, Imani, I can help you. I can help you manage it. My firm, we can handle your portfolio. I can." He was trying to find his way in to re-establish his role to become her provider in a new way. He was trying to attach himself to the success he had told her to abandon. Imani stopped. She looked at the man she had agreed to marry, the man who had offered to take care of her to protect her from her own hobby. And she felt nothing. The anger was gone. The love was gone. All that was left was a cold, absolute clarity. "Jordan," she said, her voice calm, "you looked at me exactly the same way they did, like I was something small, something to be fixed or protected or managed. You wanted me to give up the most important thing I have ever built. I was wrong, Imani. I was stupid. Just let me make it right. We can..." She held up her hand and he stopped talking. Slowly, she pulled the heavy 3-carat diamond engagement ring from her finger. The stone felt cold. She held it out and placed it in his open, trembling palm. "I am not a supporting role, Jordan," she said, her voice very quiet. "Not in your life, and not in theirs." She turned and walked away. She did not run. She walked. She left him standing on the sidewalk under the streetlight, a statue of a man staring at the ring that represented a future he had just completely miscalculated. This was the final act. It was not just about proving her family wrong. It was about freeing herself from everyone who saw her as small. The following week, Imani was in a budget review in her office when her assistant buzzed. "Imani?" Her assistant's voice was hesitant. "Your parents are here, in the lobby. They don't have an appointment." Imani took a deep breath. "It's fine. Send them in." A minute later, her parents stood in the doorway of her office. They looked lost, small, and utterly overwhelmed. They were staring wide-eyed at the bustling open-plan office, the glass walls, the teams of engineers arguing passionately at whiteboards, the sheer scale of the operation. They looked like two analog people who had accidentally wandered into the digital future. Her mother was the first to speak, her voice a reedy whisper. She was pointing at the far wall at the large framed copy of the TechCrunch article, the one with Imani's photo. "We saw this on the internet," she said. It says you're one of the most important CEOs in tech." Imani just waited. "Why didn't you tell us, Imani?" her mother asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Why did you let us go on believing? Why didn't you say anything?" Imani leaned against her desk. She did not feel anger. She just felt a great, weary sadness. "Would you have been proud, Mom?" she asked, her voice quiet. Or would you have compared it to Malik's job? Would you have told me the article was overblown? Would you have given me notes on my business plan? Would you have told me I was taking too many risks? She shook her head. I needed to do this for myself, without the commentary. I just wanted to build one thing in my life without you and Dad and Malik telling me I was doing it wrong. The truth landed on them with a crushing weight. Her mother covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Her father stood there absorbing the full impact of her words. He looked at his daughter, truly seeing her perhaps for the very first time. He saw the CEO, the power, the strength he had mistaken for a hobby. He took a long, shaky breath. What you have built here, Imani, he said, his voice thick with a new, unfamiliar emotion. It's incredible. He looked at her, his eyes shining with a profound, painful regret. I am so incredibly proud of you. What you've built, it is worthy on its own. You are worthy on your own. I am sorry, so sorry that we never made you feel that. It was not a perfect absolution. It was not a magical happy ending. But as her father stood in her world in her office and finally spoke those words, Imani felt the last tight 30-year-old knot in her chest finally begin to unwind. It was a start. Malik did not accept the severance. A week after his humiliation after the press releases had confirmed his failure to the entire tech world, he sent Imani a one-line email. I would like to see the office. Imani did not meet him at the lobby. She let him be escorted up by security. She let him stand in the middle of her bustling, thrumming open-plan office for a full 5 minutes, watching the energy, the collaboration, the sheer scale of it, before she emerged. He looked like a man from another era, his stiff corporate posture clashing with the fluid, dynamic culture she had built. It's bigger than I thought, he said, his voice quiet, hollow. It is, she said. I want you to meet someone. She did not give him a tour. She walked him directly to the office of her Chief Technology Officer, Jasmine. Jasmine was a brilliant black woman in her early 40s with a doctorate from MIT and a reputation for being able to solve impossible architectural problems. She was, in short, a real engineer by even Malik's standards. Imani made the introduction. Jasmine, this is Malik. He led the engineering team at Apex IO. He'll be joining us as a technical director reporting to you. I'll let you two talk. She left them alone. She left her brother, the man who had dismissed her as an artist, in the office of her CTO, a woman who was light years ahead of him. She returned 2 hours later. Malik was still there, but he was no longer standing. He was sitting, leaning forward, staring at a whiteboard that Jasmine had covered in complex diagrams. Malik looked pale, humbled, and completely, utterly engrossed. Your approach to distributed transactions, he was saying, his voice full of a new, unfamiliar awe. It's elegant. I never would have thought to decouple the event queue like that. We were trying to solve this problem at Apex, but we were looking at it all wrong. Jasmine just nodded as if this were obvious. You were trying to solve the logic problem. We solved the human problem first. The logic followed. Malik saw Imani in the doorway and stood up. He looked at Jasmine, then at Imani. The arrogance was gone. Your CTO is brilliant, he said, his voice quiet, formal. She is truly brilliant. He then looked at Imani, and for the first time he was seeing her. And your business strategy, he said, the words costing him a visible amount of his remaining pride. I read the full memo last night. It actually makes sense. It's the right move. He had accepted her world, not as a rival, but as a new reality. The next Easter 1 year later was different. The dinner was held at Nana Ilara's as it always was. But the air was lighter. The crushing weight of her family's expectations had lifted. Her parents, who had spent the last year bragging about both of their children, were now just parents. The conversation was balanced. Her father asked about Nexus Path's new market expansion. Her mother asked about Malik's work on his new project, a project he was co-leading with a team in Seattle. Malik and Imani talked about work, but they talked as colleagues. There was a new tentative respect between them. After dinner, Imani found herself on the front porch. The spring air was cool. She was not alone for long. The door opened and Malik stepped out, holding 2 glasses. He handed one to her. They stood in silence for a moment, an echo of that terrible night a year ago. Malik was the one to speak. He was looking out at the street, not at her. "I was wrong, Imani," he said, the words clear and unforced. "For my whole life, I was wrong about you." He took a breath. "It wasn't just about business, it was about everything. I see that now. You were the artist, and I was the genius. It was simple. It was the role I was given." He finally turned to look at her. "And then you changed the script. I think—" He paused, the admission clearly painful. "I think I was threatened by you. Deep down, I was always threatened by you. It was easier to tear you down than to admit you saw things that I didn't." Imani looked at her brother. The war was finally truly over. "I see things you don't, Malik," she said, her voice soft. "And you see things I don't. You see the engine, I see the road. The truth is, we need both approaches." She took a sip of her drink. "That's why it's working now, because we finally have both." He nodded, accepting this. He offered a small, real smile, and she returned it. Imani looked through the window. She could see Nana Alara inside holding court, laughing at a story her father was telling. A profound sense of peace settled over her. She finally understood. The real revenge was never about watching them crash. It was not about their humiliation or their failure. The real victory was in the silent, steady work. It was in building something so powerful, so undeniable, and so tall, that the people who had spent their lives looking down on her had no choice but to lift their heads and look up. True empowerment isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about building a foundation so solid that your silence has weight. When you build your success on your own terms, you don't need to fight for a seat at the table, you own the table.